The airport was bustling with people rushing to their gates, suitcases rolling across the polished floors, and announcements echoing over the loudspeakers. Among the crowd, Gunner, a K-9 police dog, walked alertly beside his handler, Agent Tom Reynolds. Suddenly, Gunner stopped abruptly near an abandoned navy blue suitcase by the baggage carousel. His ears perked up, his body tensed, and then he started barking. Not just any bark, but an urgent, desperate sound that sent a chill through Tom's spine. Tom narrowed his eyes. He had seen Gunner react to drugs and explosives before, but this was different. The dog scratched at the suitcase, pressing his nose firmly against the fabric as if begging someone to open it. Nearby passengers started backing away, some watching curiously, others shifting nervously. Tom signaled for the surrounding officers to secure the area and called for backup over his radio. His pulse quickened. He had no idea what was inside that suitcase, but Gunner's reaction told him one thing: it wasn't going to be good. With gloved hands, Tom carefully pulled the zipper. The moment the suitcase cracked open, a foul, damp smell hit him, making his stomach tighten. The crowd around him held their breath. Then he saw it. Nestled among filthy, damp rags, a tiny body trembled violently. It was a puppy, curled up, barely clinging to life. Its eyes were swollen, its fur matted and dirty, and its breaths were weak and uneven. Gunner immediately stopped barking and let out a soft whimper, lowering his head as if sensing the small creature's pain. Beside the puppy, something caught Tom's eye: a crumpled piece of paper. His fingers trembled as he unfolded it and read the hastily scribbled words. "If you found this, please take care of him. I had no choice." A cold shiver ran down his spine. Who could have done this? Who would abandon a helpless puppy like this? Before he could process it, something else caught his attention. A woman standing a few feet away, watching the scene with tears in her eyes. The moment she saw him looking at her, she turned and began to walk away. Fast. "Hey, stop right there," Tom called out, immediately moving after her. The woman hesitated, then slowly turned to face him, her eyes filled with guilt and fear. "Please, I can explain," she whispered. Her voice wasn't that of someone trying to escape justice. It was of someone carrying a heavy, painful secret. Tom's gut twisted. She knew something, and whatever she was about to say could change everything. Tom's fingers tightened around the crumpled note as he faced the woman. She looked exhausted, her face pale, dark circles under her eyes, and her hands trembling as she clutched the strap of her purse. She wasn't just nervous. She was terrified. Gunner stood tense at Tom's side, his sharp eyes locked onto her, sensing the tension in the air. Around them, the airport carried on. Passengers rushing past, announcements blaring from the loudspeakers. But in that moment, none of it mattered. This woman knew something, and Tom was going to find out what. "Who are you?" Tom's voice was steady but firm. The woman swallowed hard, her gaze darting between Tom and the officers now carefully lifting the frail puppy from the suitcase. Her lower lip trembled as she finally spoke. "My name is Rachel." Her voice was barely above a whisper, as if saying her own name out loud made her vulnerable. Tom studied her carefully. "Did you leave the puppy in that suitcase?" His tone sharpened, pushing for the truth. Before she could answer, Gunner let out a deep, rumbling growl. The low sound made Rachel flinch, her entire body stiffening. But Tom noticed something odd. She didn't look like a guilty person caught in a lie. She looked ashamed. Tears filled her eyes as she shook her head. "No, I swear, I was trying to save him." Her voice cracked as she spoke, raw and desperate. She took a small step closer, lowering her voice even more. "If they knew I was talking to you, they would." She stopped abruptly, clamping a hand over her mouth, her breathing suddenly uneven. She had already said too much. Tom's gut twisted. He had dealt with countless cases involving animal cruelty, but this felt different, bigger. He softened his tone just slightly. "Who are they?" he asked. Rachel hesitated, shifting nervously on her feet. Then, in a hushed, almost fearful whisper, she said. The kennel, the people who run it. They sell dogs like him, sick, weak, or the ones that aren't profitable. If they find out I tried to stop them, they'll come after me. A cold chill ran down Tom's spine. This wasn't just an abandoned puppy in an airport. This was part of something much darker. Rachel stole a glance over her shoulder, her fear growing by the second. I don't have much time, she whispered urgently. Please, you need to stop them. Tom exchanged a glance with one of the officers before turning back to her. Then tell me everything you know. Rachel took a deep, shaky breath. And then, in a voice full of regret, she started talking. Rachel's hands trembled as she rubbed her arms, as if trying to ward off an invisible chill. Her eyes darted around the airport, scanning the sea of faces passing by. We don't have long, she murmured. If they find out I talked to you, I'll be in danger. Gunnar, still at Tom's side, remained motionless but alert, his deep brown eyes never leaving Rachel. Tom could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on them. Whatever she was about to say would change the course of this investigation. Taking a shaky breath, Rachel finally spoke. The kennel isn't a real adoption center. It's a front. They take in stolen dogs, breed them under horrific conditions, and sell them off. Sometimes to pet stores, sometimes to people who don't ask questions. Her voice cracked. The ones that get sick, like Gunnar's puppy, they get rid of them. Her last words came out barely above a whisper, but Tom heard them loud and clear. His stomach twisted. He had seen his share of cruelty in his career, but something about this felt even worse. Tom exhaled sharply, forcing himself to stay calm. How do you know all this? Rachel hesitated, then wiped her tear-streaked face. I used to work there, she admitted. At first, I thought it was a real rescue center, but then I started seeing things. Dogs disappearing, sick puppies being tossed out like trash. I tried to speak up, but they warned me to keep my mouth shut. Her hands clenched into fists. I couldn't do it anymore, so I stole one of the puppies they were going to throw away and brought him here, hoping someone would find him before it was too late. Tom studied her face, looking for any sign of deceit, but there was none. Just guilt, fear, desperation. She wasn't lying. He glanced over at Gunnar, whose ears twitched at the sound of Rachel's trembling breath. The K9 was trained to detect stress, fear, even deception, but he remained still. That was all the confirmation Tom needed. You need to take this to the authorities, Tom pressed. If this is as big as you say, we need to shut them down. Rachel shook her head violently. I can't. You don't understand. These people aren't just running a puppy mill. They have connections. If they find out I talked, I'll disappear just like those dogs. Tom clenched his jaw. If Rachel was right, this wasn't just an illegal kennel. This was part of something far more dangerous. Rachel took a step closer, her voice urgent. I don't care what happens to me, she whispered. Just promise me one thing. Make them pay for what they did. Tom locked eyes with her, then nodded. I will. But deep down, he knew this was just the beginning. Tom's mind raced as he processed everything Rachel had told him. If what she was saying was true, then this wasn't just about Gunnar's puppy. It was about dozens, maybe hundreds of dogs suffering in silence. But what disturbed him most was the fear in her eyes. Rachel wasn't just afraid of getting in trouble. She was afraid for her life. That meant whoever was behind this operation wasn't just a group of irresponsible breeders. They were something much worse. Gunnar let out a low whimper, his gaze flickering between Tom and the puppy now being cradled in an officer's arms. The little dog was still breathing, but barely. His tiny body shivered uncontrollably, and Tom could see how malnourished he was. How many more were out there like him? That thought ignited something inside Tom. A deep, simmering anger that made his jaw tighten. He wasn't going to let this slide. Turning back to Rachel, Tom's voice was calm but firm. I need names, addresses, anything that can help us track them down. Rachel hesitated, shifting nervously on her feet. I only know what I heard, she admitted. They keep things quiet, but I heard them mention a place outside the city, a warehouse near the old train yards. That's where they take the sick ones. Her voice trembled. The ones they don't want. Tom exchanged a glance with one of the officers. A warehouse. That could mean illegal breeding, euthanization, or worse. He pulled out his phone and quickly typed a message to his unit, requesting immediate surveillance on the location. Then he met Rachel's gaze again. "If you're lying to me," he started, but she cut him off, her voice sharp with emotion. "I'm not." Her eyes were filled with guilt, anger, and something else, determination. "I should have stopped them sooner," she whispered. "I should have done something before it got this bad." Tom studied her for a moment, then nodded. "You're doing something now." He turned to the officers. "Take the puppy to the vet. Make sure he gets the best care possible." Gunnar wagged his tail slightly, as if approving the decision. The K9 had sensed something in Rachel. Maybe redemption, maybe remorse, but either way, they were in this now. Rachel exhaled shakily. "What happens next?" she asked. Tom's expression hardened. "Now, we find them." His voice was cold, resolute. Whoever was behind this wasn't just hurting animals. They were running a cruel, heartless business, and Tom was about to bring it crashing down. The sun had long since set by the time Tom pulled his unmarked SUV onto the dirt road leading to the old train yards. The headlights barely cut through the thick fog rolling over the abandoned warehouses. Gunnar sat in the passenger seat, his ears perked, body tense. He could sense something was wrong. Tom tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his gut telling him this wasn't just a simple bust. This was something bigger. Rachel had given him everything she knew. Names, phone numbers, even a rough schedule of when the sick dogs were taken away. Tom had forwarded the intel to his team, and now backup units were stationed nearby, waiting for his signal. He exhaled slowly, scanning the area. No cameras, no security. On the surface, it looked like just another abandoned warehouse. But Tom knew better. Cruelty this calculated always hid in the shadows. Gunnar let out a low growl as Tom stepped out of the car, his boots crunching against the gravel. The air was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the distant sound of a train horn. He approached the rusted metal door, pressing his ear against it. Nothing. But as he reached for the handle, Gunnar suddenly barked. A sharp, urgent warning. Something or someone was inside. Tom pulled his gun from his holster and signaled to his team through his earpiece. "I've got movement inside. Going in." A faint response crackled back. "Copy that. We're moving in position." With Gunnar close at his side, Tom pushed the door open, his weapon raised. The first thing that hit him was the stench, urine, decay, and something far worse. He swallowed hard, his eyes adjusting to the dimly lit interior. And then he saw them. Cages. Dozens of them, stacked on top of each other, packed so tightly the dogs inside could barely move. Some were puppies, their ribs protruding through filthy fur. Others were older, eyes dull with exhaustion. A single flickering light bulb buzzed overhead, casting eerie shadows across the room. Tom felt his blood run cold. This wasn't just a kennel. This was a nightmare. Then, a noise, footsteps. Someone was here. Before Tom could react, a door at the back of the warehouse slammed shut. Gunnar barked, lunging forward, his instincts kicking in. Tom's grip tightened on his gun as he turned toward the sound. Whoever had been here wasn't planning on sticking around to get caught. Gritting his teeth, he whispered into his radio. "Suspect on the move. Block all exits. No one gets out." Then, without hesitation, he took off running. Tom sprinted toward the back of the warehouse, Gunnar at his side, his powerful paws pounding against the cold concrete floor. The metal door ahead was still rattling from being slammed shut, the echo bouncing off the walls. Whoever had been inside was now on the run, and Tom wasn't about to let them escape. He burst through the door and into the night, his breath visible in the frigid air. In the distance, he caught the shadowy figure of a man darting between rusted train cars. Suspect heading east, past the yard. Tom barked into his radio. A response crackled through. "Units are moving to intercept." But Tom knew he couldn't wait. This man had answers. He had to be caught. Gunner was already locked onto the scent. His body low, eyes sharp, every muscle coiled like a spring. Then, as if on command, Gunner lunged forward. The fleeing man glanced back and saw the K9 coming for him. He veered left, scrambling over an old pile of wooden crates. Tom followed, vaulting over debris, his adrenaline spiking. The man was fast, but he was sloppy. His movements were panicked, uncoordinated. He was scared. That only made Tom push harder. "Stop now," he commanded. But the suspect didn't slow. Big mistake. Gunner closed the distance in seconds. With a deep, guttural bark, he launched himself forward, knocking the man off balance. The suspect hit the ground hard, letting out a sharp grunt as Gunner pinned him, powerful jaws just inches from his arm. He didn't dare move. "Good boy," Tom muttered as he closed in, yanking the man onto his feet and shoving him against the side of a rusted train car. "Who are you working for?" he demanded. The man, mid-40s, unshaven, eyes darting wildly, shook his head frantically. I don't know what you're talking about, man. I was just..." Tom slammed him harder against the metal, cutting off his lie. "Don't waste my time," he growled. "I know this is bigger than you. Start talking." Gunner stood beside him, still growling low, his breath steady, his presence unmistakably threatening. The man swallowed hard, glancing at the dog. Finally, his shoulders slumped. All right, he muttered. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "You don't know what you're getting yourself into." Tom's grip tightened on the man's collar. "Try me." The suspect exhaled shakily, then murmured a name, one that made Tom's blood run cold. A name he never expected to hear. Tom's grip on the suspect's collar tightened as the man muttered the name, his voice barely audible over the distant hum of the train yard. "Marcus Kane." The moment those words left the suspect's lips, Tom felt a cold shock run through his veins. He had heard that name before, years ago during an investigation that had gone nowhere. Kane wasn't just some low-level criminal. He was a ghost, someone who operated in the shadows, pulling the strings while staying completely off the radar. If he was involved in this, then this was bigger than just an illegal kennel. Much bigger. Gunner let out a low, rumbling growl, sensing the shift in Tom's energy. The suspect's eyes darted between them, his face pale with fear. "You don't get it," the man stammered. "If Kane finds out I talked to you, I'm dead." He tried to wrench free, but Tom shoved him harder against the rusted train car. "And if you don't keep talking, you'll wish Kane was your biggest problem," Tom snapped. His patience was running thin, and every second wasted was another second those dogs, and possibly people, were suffering under Kane's operation. The suspect swallowed hard, his gaze flicking around as if expecting someone to emerge from the darkness. "He's running more than just dogs," he finally admitted, his voice shaking. "The kennel is just a cover. Kane's moving high-value contraband, dogs, exotic animals, even people. The ones that don't sell, they disappear." His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. "And he's not working alone." Tom's jaw clenched. Human trafficking. His worst suspicions were confirmed. This wasn't just an underground breeding ring, it was a front for something much worse. The realization made his stomach turn. He had spent years tracking down criminals like Kane, but no one had ever been able to pin anything on him. If this lead was real, if Rachel's information was right, this was their chance to take him down. Footsteps pounded against the gravel as backup officers approached, their weapons drawn. "We got him?" one of them asked, eyes scanning the area. Tom nodded but didn't take his eyes off the suspect. "Yeah, but we need more." He turned back to the man, his tone deadly serious. "Where is Kane now?" The suspect hesitated, his face twisting in fear. Then, just as he opened his mouth to answer, a gunshot rang out in the night. The man's body tensed, his eyes going wide in shock. He gasped, stumbled forward, and collapsed. Gunner barked furiously as Tom instinctively crouched, scanning the rooftops and shadows. Someone had just silenced their only lead. Tom's pulse pounded in his ears. Whoever was behind this wasn't just trying to hide. They were willing to kill to keep their secret buried. Tom dropped to one knee beside the suspect, pressing 2 fingers against his neck. No pulse. The man's eyes were frozen open in shock, his body limp against the gravel. Perfect shot, clean, precise, and professional. This wasn't random violence. This was an execution. Gunnar let out a sharp, anxious bark, his ears pinned back as he scanned the darkness. He could smell it, danger was still nearby. "Sniper! Take cover!" Tom barked into his radio, his instincts kicking in. Officers scrambled behind crates and rusted train cars, weapons drawn, eyes scanning the rooftops. But the silence that followed was unnerving. No second shot. No movement. Whoever had pulled the trigger was already gone. Tom ground his teeth, frustration bubbling inside him. They had been seconds away from getting a location on Marcus Kane, and now their only lead was bleeding out on the dirt. Gunnar growled low, his nose lifting toward the air. Tom followed his gaze toward the warehouse entrance. The door was slightly ajar now, it hadn't been before. Someone had slipped inside. Tom exhaled sharply and signaled 2 officers. "Move in now." Gunnar took the lead as they approached the entrance, his body tense, every muscle coiled like a spring. Tom's grip tightened on his gun as he pushed the door open, the rusty hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the warehouse was darker than before, the single buzzing light flickering overhead. The cages were still there, some empty, others with frightened dogs pressing themselves against the bars. But something was different. The air felt heavier. Tom could sense it, the way a predator could sense when they were being watched. He moved carefully between the cages, his steps slow, controlled. Then he saw it. On a wooden crate near the back wall, a single black envelope rested on top of a clipboard filled with shipment logs. Tom reached for it cautiously, opening the flap. Inside was a note, written in bold, sharp letters. "Back off. You have no idea what you're up against." The hair on Tom's arms stood on end. This wasn't a warning. It was a challenge. Tom clenched his jaw, his eyes flicking back to the terrified dogs locked in cages. Backing off wasn't an option. Kane had just made his first mistake. He thought fear would stop them. Tom slipped the note into his pocket and turned to his team. "We're shutting this place down. Now." Gunnar stood beside him, tail stiff, eyes locked on the darkness beyond. This wasn't over. Not even close. The warehouse had become a full-scale crime scene. Officers moved quickly, cutting open rusted cage doors and carefully lifting the rescued dogs to safety. Some were too weak to stand. Others flinched at even the gentlest touch, their bodies trembling with fear. The sight was gut-wrenching, but Tom's mind was elsewhere. His fingers brushed against the black envelope in his pocket. "Back off." That message wasn't just a threat. It was a warning from someone who had already proven they were willing to kill to protect their operation. And yet, Tom had no intention of backing off. Beside him, Gunnar paced restlessly, his tail stiff, ears high, scanning every inch of the warehouse with sharp, alert eyes. The K9 could sense it. The job wasn't finished. There was still danger lingering in the air, still unfinished business. Tom turned, his gaze locking onto Rachel, who stood off to the side, arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her face was pale, her eyes flickering between the lifeless body of the suspect and the terrified dogs still being carried out. She had warned him about how dangerous these people were, and now their only lead was dead. Tom took a step toward her. "I need more," he said firmly. "You told me about this place, but Kane wasn't here. Where else does he operate?" Rachel bit her lip, hesitating. "I don't know for sure," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "But there's another site. I heard them talk about a transport location where they move the dogs. And the others." Her voice cracked at those last words, and Tom felt a deep unease settle over him. "It's isolated," she continued. "They don't keep records. No names, no addresses. Everything is done with burner phones and cash. A transport site. That meant the operation wasn't shutting down, it was still running." Tom's radio crackled to life, and an officer's voice came through. "Sir, we just pulled footage from a traffic cam 2 blocks away. You're gonna want to see this. He hurried to the mobile command post, Gunner trotting at his side. On the grainy screen, a black van with no plates was visible, pulling out of the warehouse just minutes before they arrived. Tom's stomach twisted. They had been here. Kane's people had been here, and they were already gone. Rachel stepped up beside him, staring at the footage. "That's them," she whispered. Tom clenched his jaw. They had been so damn close. But Marcus Kane was slippery, always one step ahead. Not this time. He turned to his officers. "We need to track that van. Now." Commands flew across radios as units set up roadblocks and began scouring the streets. Time was slipping away, but Tom wasn't about to let Kane disappear again. He exhaled slowly, his grip tightening on Gunner's leash. The dog remained focused, staring at the flickering screen, ears twitching as if sensing what was coming next. "Looks like we're not done yet, buddy," Tom muttered. Gunner gave a short, eager bark. The hunt wasn't over. Not until Kane was behind bars. The radio in Tom's hand crackled with static before an officer's voice broke through. "We found the van. It's abandoned. No sign of the driver." Tom gritted his teeth as frustration tightened in his chest. Kane had slipped through their fingers again. Gunner stood at his side, his ears pricked, his breath steady. The dog could sense the tension in the air. The hunt wasn't over. Tom pulled up to the location within minutes. The black van sat at the edge of an old industrial lot, its back doors hanging slightly open, creaking in the wind. The scent of urine, sweat, and fear was thick inside. Tom's jaw clenched as he peered into the cargo hold. Empty cages, blood-stained blankets. Whoever had been in there was already gone. But they hadn't been gone for long. Gunner sniffed the ground furiously, his body tense, his tail straight as a rod. Then suddenly a bark. Loud, urgent. Tom's instincts kicked in. Gunner had picked up a trail. Without hesitation, Tom signaled his team. "Fan out. We're not letting him slip away this time." Gunner took the lead, his paws kicking up dirt as he followed the scent, weaving between rusted metal containers and stacks of old wooden pallets. The trail led toward the dense tree line beyond the lot. A perfect place to disappear. Tom's heart pounded as he ran, his grip tightening on his weapon. Kane was close. As they pushed deeper into the woods, a noise cut through the silence. Footsteps. Fast. Unsteady. Someone was running. Gunner let out a low growl before breaking into a sprint. Tom followed, dodging branches and weaving between the trees. The sound of panting and snapping twigs grew louder. Whoever was ahead of them was panicked, desperate. Tom raised his gun and shouted, "FBI! Stop now. Hands where I can see them." A figure stumbled into a clearing, hands raised in surrender. The man's face was drenched in sweat, his eyes darting wildly. But Tom's stomach dropped when he got a better look. It wasn't Kane. This man was a pawn, a disposable piece in Kane's operation. Tom grabbed him, shoving him against a tree. "Where is he?" The man gasped for air. "He's gone. He knew you were coming. He left me behind." His voice cracked with fear. "Please, I don't want to die for him." Tom clenched his jaw, barely containing his anger. Of course Kane had run. The man was too smart, too well connected to be caught this easily. But this time, Tom had something Kane hadn't counted on: evidence. They had uncovered his operation, rescued the animals, found the money trails, the fake adoption records. Kane could run, but he couldn't hide forever. Tom took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. He looked down at Gunner, who stood alert, his sharp eyes scanning the darkness, waiting for the next move. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. He tightened his grip on the suspect's collar and leaned in close. "Tell Kane he's next."